When God began to create the heavens and the earth, they intoned a song so absolute, only the folding of strangers' hands, the second take of fingertips. Wait, I think I know. The lingering before letting go could rouse the fog of our inception and the vertigo of unknowing and the forecast of our reunion. Blessed are those who listen, for it is through their humming back that God knows itself. Some people feel familiar because we recognize a shard of the omniscient eye staring back into us, piercing us while we sing.
Welcome to Voice Seeker. I'm your host, Dandelion Lakewood. In this episode, I sat down with the songwriter, composer, and performer, Gracie Caggiano. We cover a broad spectrum of topics, including perfectionism, suffering, joy, death, poetry, perspective, and life as an artist with a disability. You'll have an opportunity to hear some of Gracie's original compositions throughout the episode. The recording quality fits the conversation about imperfection. It's a bit noisy. You can hear the echo of the room and Gracie's upstairs neighbors stomping around sometimes. Listening through the foggy lens of those flaws, you will hopefully discover some gems in our conversation. Let's get to it. It's always interesting to start a conversation that you know you're recording because it's kind of that awareness that you're being recorded, and then it's hard to shake it off for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I always feel that way when I'm doing either a video or a conversation or even like an improvisation.
I feel that way with journaling sometimes. I don't know if anyone else has the same feeling, but I get that feeling like, what if somebody reads this? Like after I die, like what would they think of me? And so then I'm like checking my grammar. It's really funny. No one's probably gonna read my journal after I die. You never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
You never know.
I hope not.
They make sure that you burn them beforehand. But then do you write your journal for yourself?
I do. I'm not very consistent with it, but it helps me get things out of my brain so that I can stop overthinking.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I don't want anyone to read it.
Yeah. Because it's maybe not even your complete thoughts. It's like a moment in time that you're going through.
Yeah. And I would be concerned if I read someone's journal.
Yeah. Well.
What a great way to start a conversation.
I think this is really nice, though, because I also have been a journaler. I think I started journaling when I was in school. We had to do it for like an English class. And I got into it. And I also was very moody and pre-adolescent and writing things that are kind of disturbing to look at now. But I have those things, so I can look at that now, which is really an interesting thing to look into your mind of your younger self and all the things that were preoccupying you and stuff like that. And I think that the process of journaling is cool because it's not meant for sharing. I mean, now with the blogging and all of these formats of communication with social media, people do a lot of journaling that's public. Mm-hmm. But the original journal was definitely a very private thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I find that it kind of helps me with like creative blockage. Like if I don't get certain things out of my system, I just can't create. Like I'm frozen. And so I find it really necessary to journal, but then it's like I'm ready to move on to the things that I want people to hear and read and see at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I think that there's this kind of, and also with a sketchbook, it's kind of the same thing where the completist person who wants to like do the thing once and have it be perfect is at war with this iterative repetition, slowly evolving version person. So yeah, it's kind of a messy process. The
Mm-hmm.
journal's not meant to be just perfectly written and in paragraphs and spaced out. It needs to be maybe crossing things out or
Mm-hmm.
written in different colors of ink or upside down or backwards. I remember one friend, and she made a sketchbook that she would just open up random pages and do it, like not in sequence, and that drove me crazy. I was like, "What are you do?"
She doesn't want to. She doesn't want to see the progression.
Yeah.
She just wants to draw.
Yeah, yeah, and it was a beautiful book, but I remember thinking how much that bugged me. Um, but maybe I need to do that myself sometime just to try it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, journaling and making a record. I mean, sometimes though it does feel like writing a message in a bottle, you know, and sending it out to sea. But it could be also a message to our future self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I definitely feel that way, especially because I'm so inconsistent with it. Like if I journaled every day, I think I probably wouldn't look back as much, but I journal like every 3 months and then I'll journal like every day for a week and then I won't touch it again for another 2 months. And so every time that I open the journal, the last entry it's almost like that is a message to my future self. Because I just haven't looked at it in 3 months. And I'm like, whoa, that's where I was last time that I felt like I needed to open this book.
Interesting. And do you find that you choose to write in your journal in certain kinds of feelings or emotional states?
Yeah, I do. And I've noticed it tends to be negative. Things that are like I'm like really anxious or like depressed. Just like really complex, like deep negative emotions. And I noticed that and I thought I should really try to like journal about gratitude sometime. And I have done it a couple times, but I find that I journal when I need to get rid of something that's stopping me or making me feel frozen. And those are typically negative emotions.
It's funny that you journal to get rid of things, but you're crystallizing them in written words on paper for even future generations, possibly. And so yeah, like just but it seems like it's easier to do it to write when you're having a grumpy day than when you're having a good day. When you're having a great day, it's almost like you're in the moment so much you don't want to step out of it and be documenting it.
Yeah. I feel the same way about writing songs too. I'm like, I don't know when I'm gonna write a happy song. Because I'm like, sometimes I wonder, I'm like, have I felt that emotion that the people who write happy songs put into the song? Or am I just, I don't know, I don't feel the need to like process it the same way that I do some of the other songs that I write about more negative emotions, for lack of a better term. But
Well, do you listen to happy music?
yeah, I think so. Occasionally. Yeah, I do. I had to think about that.
Yeah.
So I'm like, wait, what have I listened to recently? It's always so funny, like, especially now with algorithms and things like that, or like AI curated playlists, and the things that are recommended to me are like Sad Girl Starter Pack. I'm like, this is really embarrassing and cringy.
Did it really say that?
Yeah, I recently, I think earlier this week, I got one from Spotify that was Sad Girl Starter Pack.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would. What would that be as a GIF? Or
As a GIF?
It's like an image. What would be the sad girl starter pack in the picture?
Oh.
Clove cigarettes.
I do not smoke cigarettes.
But in the sad girl but like the kind of typical sad girl.
Doc Martens.
Doc Martens. A Cure poster.
Phoebe Bridgers. I don't know.
Yeah. That's funny that the algorithms are really being able to observe a lot about us. That what's it called? Surveillance capitalism. All that data that is being generated by our behaviors is really a very valuable resource for some folks. I wonder what the CIA would do with something like that.
Sad girl starter pack.
Or yeah, just like that knowledge about the kind of music you listen to. I mean, is that like opening us up for types of manipulation?
Just listening to Adrienne Lenker again.
Oh, I love her, man. She's so good.
She's so good.
Wow, I that popped into my radar. I heard a song. It was like this one. I forget. It's like
Anything.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about anyone. Don't want to talk about. And I heard that, and I was like, "Wow, this is so good." It sounds like amateur, but at the same time, it sounds like
It's
amateur
so
and
intentional.
virtuosic at the same time. Like the recordings have all of these like little like flaws, but they're so perfectly done.
It's just really authentic.
Yeah.
Like.
It's so good. Like she does it live in a moment, and that's it.
Yeah, and I would really like to hear more of that in music, honestly. I feel like we've gotten so married to like a certain standard of production that we don't see the value in other kinds of aesthetics. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine earlier this year, actually, about like that home video aesthetic. Like, I think we were listening to, it's like a recording of Joni Mitchell and Graham Nash singing Our House, and it was just like they didn't care about the production. It was just honest and authentic and in the moment and how they felt and what they were playing at that point in time. And I think that there are some artists that would really benefit from leaning into like that kind of aesthetic, and I think there could be like a whole market for that as well, if we have to bring the market into it.
Right. I think been thinking about this a lot too, because one time someone was talking about in a group setting where he mentioned that all the music that you hear and all the pictures you see are all photoshopped and auto-tuned, and you know the singers that we listen to on a regular basis are inhumanly perfect. The people we see are inhumanly perfect, and everyone is so frightened to sing with their own voice. They don't feel adequate, and so all of our entertainment now is coming from these professionals and all of this extremely perfected professional kind of caliber musicians and models and actors. Yet for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, people were making music just together in a room or around a campfire or in some festival, and they were putting on little plays together. A couple of weeks ago, I was able to participate in a cabaret show at this event that this camp out in Wisconsin. It was an Earth Skills gathering, and so they organized it to be a cabaret on one night, and it was so cute. It was like they had puppets and things because the person who organized it, Oren, who was working in a puppet company in Minneapolis, and so Oren brought all of these puppets and was co-hosting with another one of the instructors from the camp, and they just were changing costumes every time they came out in between acts, and they had all of these very creative ways of introducing, like having puppets and like having like a string with the letter on it, and you read the name of the next artist, and then there was musicians, and a little kid was doing comedy and all this stuff, and it was so captivating. Everyone's really into it. And I guess that makes me think of the aesthetics of the Little Rascals. I don't know if you ever saw the Little Rascals. I remember growing up, and my favorite ones were where they would make their own cabarets in the basement or in a barn, and they'd be putting on these shows where all the kids were running it, and they had all these special effects and props and things, but it was all done by the kids, and I think that aesthetic was really inspiring.
It's just like pure creativity, pure humanness, and I mean, that like truly captures like an honest experience. Like when you have auto tune and everything and Photoshop and everything, like that has its own value. I don't want to like discount the use of those things, but it's not capturing reality. And yeah, so I find a lot of value in choosing to like emphasize flaws or emphasize things that are imperfect, like the squeak in your guitar, or like if you don't hit the beat exactly on time, or if a note is a little bit flat, or if you run out of breath and your vibrato gets a little too shaky, like those I think are all really beautiful things that people can lean into.
Right.
It's like capturing a really honest experience with our creativity.
And think about how now there's all these AI making images and making music now. So for someone to synthesize and create, or for something to synthesize and create, that authenticity is much more difficult. I think it's really easy for an AI algorithm to make like a stereotypically beautiful face that's completely flawless and like in this way that doesn't even really exist. Like they know how to do that perfectly. But when it comes to a face that's real and actually a substantial and has all of those different elements, I think it's much more challenging to do. And the same with the music. It's like if people who do 3D artwork can easily generate a perfect sphere, but if they wanted to make a pool cue ball that's 100 years old, they would have to spend a lot of time on it because they would have to get all of these details on that just all of the scuffs and everything. And a person too, the more scars and wrinkles and things, then that's more details and that's more challenging to make. So that's funny because the craftsperson might be trying to make this perfect shaped thing, and failing because they're human. But then coming from the other direction, in the computer world, it's like it's easy to make that perfect shape thing. But then you have to take it into if you want it to look like it was handcrafted, it's a bunch of work. So there's this kind of two sides moving towards each other. So people who are, of course, when we're writing songs and recording, we want this perfect version. That's this ultimate thing that's not possible. It's just not possible to get the perfect version.
Yeah.
It's so stressful.
I had to come to terms with that earlier this year. So, I released my album.
That's right.
And I didn't think that it was gonna happen, because I was stuck in that like rumination loop of like perfectionism and like, oh, I can hear this little imperfection in the mix and I can't figure out how to make it go away, and like, oh, everyone's gonna hear this one little detail that's like not good, or I can't get the kick drum to sound the way that I want it to in this song. And like there were all these things. I was like, I'm never gonna release this album if I don't just embrace it as it is right now with all of these imperfections. And so that's what I did. I had to let go and say like, it's imperfect and it's beautiful as it is too. Like, but then I don't know. I feel like I've started. I mean, just the older that I get, I just lean more into that, like, imperfect things have aesthetic value as well. And even though I'm still striving to get better at my craft, I feel like I have grace for myself in a way that I didn't have it before. Because I've been able to embrace imperfect things. I feel like this kind of comes full circle to like, I mean, it's early in the conversation still, but kind of like how we're talking about like journaling and like scribbling things out, and like giving yourself permission to do that. And I feel like
we don't give ourselves permission to do that with our art as much as we do something that's supposed to be like very personal. But yeah, I kind of wonder what would happen to the creative landscape, just like on a broader scale, if more people embraced imperfection.
Was that me? Turn that off if it is. Yeah, what would it be like if more people embrace imperfection? I was so when you were there's a few things that I was thinking about responding to there what you were talking about. One of them being about songs, and I feel like, for example, I've got some songs that I wrote maybe 15 years ago, and then I recorded almost immediately, and it was kind of it was more like a demo, and those are these versions of these songs that exist now that I've published, and I'm thinking about it like, this is not the song anymore. It's something, but it's different now, and so I give myself permission to at some point re-record those songs. So that in that way it kind of can free me up to be like, okay, like this is an old version, but I can do a new version. And anyway, the songs are living and they're always changing. You know, every performance is going to change a little bit, and that's also what makes the value of being a performer, right? I mean, I guess if you're playing to a complete backing track all the time, then the performance is going to be a lot less different, but you can still even sing differently, or not at all. Some artists might just play the backing track. I don't want to get into that too much, but yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea of a song having a life. I think about that a lot too. Like, a song was one thing 15 years ago when you wrote it for the first time, but it ages like a person does, because it moves with you, and like you change as a person. And so when you come back to that art 15 years later, like of course you're going to feel like the song is different as well. I think that's a really interesting thing to see over the lifespan of other artists. I think of Joni Mitchell because she's Joni Mitchell. But thinking of like, A Case of You and the different versions that she has, and her voice has changed so much, so the key is different, but the arrangements are also drastically different, from like the acoustic guitar to, and like the dulcimer to, more orchestral like setting, and it's the same song. It has just aged with her, and I think that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I like that a lot. In my research of learning folklore music, I really make it a point to find a lot of versions of the same song. If it's the song that I get obsessed with, I'll find a song and it'll catch me like some kind of melody from the fairies, and then I'll study it deeply, and I want to listen to all these different versions of it and really get a feel of who that song is through all of these different perspectives and arrangements and different artists. And and so we can even just do that as one artist with our own song, have so many ways of representing it, and depending on our mood and everything. Yeah, that's something, because the song itself anyway, like, it wouldn't even, these recordings, those things didn't exist more than, I guess a little bit more than 100 years. I'm not sure when the wax cylinder came out, but probably like 1915 or something like that, or
somewhere around
I don't think I've heard any recordings older than around that, but and I guess then before that there was just recorded music by written music, which was also created its own scandals, right? Like there was a whole copyright thing from that. Yeah. That was kind of the beginning of the publishing music debacle, was with the sheet music. But before that, then people were just singing the songs and they would hear it, and then they'd sing it again to someone else, and then it would change, and this is a game of telephone. And I've got songs that I've been getting really into lately that have gone through all these transformations. Like there's this one I've been learning, it's called The Hills of Mexico, and it's about this farmer. No, he's like a cow. He's a young young person who's approached by a cowboy to go and work with him in Mexico for the summer, and he entices him to come out there, and then he works, and then it's kind of like a bad time, so he goes back and tells everyone not to go. And that song is coming from this other song, apparently called the Buffalo Skinners, which is about these guys getting invited to go down to kill and skin the buffalo, because they were doing that to deplete the buffalo population as like a war against Native American people. And in this song, they go there and they're hired to go and kill and skin all this buffalo, but then the man who hired them ends up not paying them and telling them actually they owe him, and they leave his bones in the hills of the buffalo. And that song was traced back to one guy who wrote it, who had done that job, but he said that there was a joke actually, because they got along well with their boss, but in the song the boss mistreats them and they leave his bones, but actually they didn't have that problem apparently. Like, that's from the people who were researching this tune. But there's so many branches of it, and then that song was apparently inspired by this other song talking about going to Canada to work and it being bad and you shouldn't go to Canada to work. And then that song is supposedly inspired by a song about someone in like England going over to the New World to work. So there's like this heritage of these songs, and then someone hears it and then they adapt it and they change it and they make it about a different situation. And if there was copyright or you Google sound check or whatever it's called, if there's these services that basically prohibit you from making derivative works, those all of these songs wouldn't have even existed probably. They would have just stayed back there.
That's so interesting to think about. I sometimes wonder, like, after I die, like, what's gonna happen to my music? And, like, what do I want to happen to my music? It's like, I would love if people would just recreate it and embrace it, like, in their own way. Because if I'm not there, like, I don't know if I'll have kids. I don't really plan on it. But I'm like, where would this money for all this copyright go to anyway? Like, might as well just let people enjoy the music after I'm dead.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel very good to just have a publishing company get rich off of your creation in perpetuity.
Yeah.
I think about that too. I mean, I think it even has influenced a lot of the way that I've written songs, because I definitely want to make songs that are easy for people to sing and play along with. I have made some pretty complicated songs too, which I like, but there is something about, well, what gives a song longevity, right? Like, there's plenty of songs, like Pete Seeger says, it's like a pyramid whose height is the same as its base. So all these, the peak of it is as high up as the width of it, of how many, songs there are. And if you look at Spotify, I think how many thousands and thousands of songs are released every day, and how many of them are even, like, gonna even be heard by more than 10 people. Even very good music is heard by very few people. It's so frustrating sometimes. But also, it's also kind of encouraging, because you look at some really great artists and you're like, okay, well, they're great, but they also are struggling to get listeners.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong if you have a low listenership, because it's not like your music's bad. It could be many things.
It's not a reflection on your talent or your artistry. It's just how it happens to be, or how often do you like to be on social media? I feel like that's like a huge part of it. It's like, if you like to play that game, like, you probably will do well. But some of us like to not be on the internet.
Yeah. And I feel like the social media chasing all of those little viral vertical videos it's putting your creative energy in that versus something lasting. And I would prefer to make something that will last rather than something that's more disposable. And I'm sure that there will be some vertical format, quick videos that maybe will last a long time, but that it just feels so disposable to me. It doesn't feel like an archival medium. It feels like something that you just look at and throw away, almost like a flyer that someone handed you. And I would like to see more people crafting things with a mind of lasting. I feel like we have such a disposable world, and people are just kind of like, let's make this disposable thing and then throw it away and make a new one. And I'm like, well, don't you want to make things that have some kind of longevity to them? You know,
Yeah.
don't you want to speak to further generations? Don't you want to have something that has a little bit of resonance and rings out rather than being... I mean, I guess that, you know, but there's something to be said about making topical content for the moment. It's also, I guess, an important thing. Like a newspaper would get thrown away too.
Yeah.
But the writing in the newspaper is important for some people as well, as much as a novel.
Yeah. It is tricky to think through because there can be value in anything, but I do find that I like kind of resonate with what you say. I find myself now like kind of seeing it as like a necessity to make that like short form vertical video content and just for reach, because I'm like, how else am I going to reach the people that I want to share that like long lasting art with? Because I mean, like that's just one way to see its value is like everyone has access to TikTok, right? At least for now. And so like that's a way to connect with people that you otherwise would not connect with. And you know, we might feel like the connection is not as deep as those connections that we make in person in like our local community, which I tend to agree with that point too, but it still has value. And then I think that your work that you want to last a really long time can then reach more people. It's like, but how is anyone ever going to know that exists unless you play a little bit of the social media game?
That's interesting. That I was thinking about also how sometimes when I see some artists that are really, really popular in like the local scene, they have very few people following them on social media. Like it might be, you know, they might have just a couple hundred Instagram followers, but they're playing a lot of concerts with a lot of people coming. You know, that those 200 followers might come to every concert. Versus if you could have like 9,000 followers or 20 or 100,000 who maybe just like wouldn't even come to the concert if they lived in the same town.
Don't even like your videos anymore.
Yeah, it's weird. It's not really an indicator of anything other than, I guess, a kind of luck or how, I don't know. I mean, for sure, like some people, you know, people have a lot of people following them, must provide some value to those folks. But does that value translate over to something more tangible, like an experience where you're sharing the space? I don't know. It could, but it's not guaranteed. It's not like a one-to-one relationship. I think that you might be really lucky to blow up on a TikTok video that goes viral, but like that doesn't mean that anyone's even going to go and check out your music. And a lot of musicians now are even just making all these videos that have nothing to do with their music. So someone might know them as the person who makes the funny jokes about like, what if you're a typeface and you're talking to other typefaces? You know what I'm talking about? She's like a musician, you know, but she, you know, people might not know that because
she just makes memes.
She makes really good videos that are hilarious, and I love them. But it's not like getting people to listen to the music, though. So then you become known for this thing. What's her name? Elena? Is it Elena Cordova? I think.
Oh, I don't know.
Anyway, I really like her comedy. But you know, it's like do musicians have to provide like their grandmother's recipes in order to get someone to like look at their content online, and then then maybe they'll check out their music. Maybe.
It's a really interesting thing to try to think through. I feel like I've been thinking about this for like the greater portion of the year as I keep going back and forth with how I want to market myself. And I think the only conclusion that I've really come to at all is no matter what I'm doing, just do it with intention and like decide what my intention is. And that usually has nothing to do with getting a new follower, getting somebody to listen to my song on Spotify. It's just like, how can I transmit like this like divine gift of creativity that I feel like has been given to me from someplace in the universe, and just like give it away to someone else in some capacity, whether it's like a little video, whether it's a in-person performance at an open mic or a show, like no matter what I'm doing, I'm just trying to be like the most honest version of myself. And I think that that in itself is like my gift, like the value that I'm trying to give away. Like, I don't know, I just feel like we keep talking about perfectionism and things like that, and so I feel like it's really important for anyone in our society to like understand that they have permission to be their authentic self, and by being my authentic self in whatever way, shape, or form that appears, whether it's content or not, like that's just my intention with everything. That's I mean, it's like anything else that I ruminate on. Like, I'll think of all these existential questions, and then it comes down to one thing, and it's like, there is no answer. There is no solution. Really, like, the only thing that you can be certain of is, like, what is your intention? What is your will? That's all you really have at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, because, like, artifice and... I think that's the thing about a lot of this communication, is that it becomes a form of sales. But then again, if you don't inform people about what you're doing, then no one will know. So giving people updates about what you're working on, it's okay.
Yeah.
But then people are so tired of advertisements, they just don't want to be advertised to. So how do you share what you're doing but without selling it? Or how, you're like, I don't want to think of it as being sales, but it is in a way selling.
I mean, exactly what I was just saying, though.
Yeah.
Don't sell, just be.
Just be yourself.
And then show it to people.
Right. Because when I see something that seems like they're trying to sell me something, I just
No.
don't even want to look at it.
Do not interact.
I'm so trained to resist it. But then when I would like to inform people about what's going on, I have this complex where I'm concerned about appearing salesy. And that makes me hold back a lot about updating people about things.
Yeah.
Because I worked as a telemarketer when I was a teenager for like a year and a half. And we were calling people and selling long distance. That's how long ago it was. They were selling long distance on the landlines. And it was just the crappiest experience. You know, you're bothering people at dinner time to try to sell them something they don't want, and you're supposed to listen to them and then acknowledge what they said and make a response and ask them a question to get them to get control of the call. They have all these techniques to kind of manipulate someone into going through the sales process. And after that experience, I really just hated salespeople of all kinds.
Yeah. I hear you. I was thinking about that, like, Bandcamp Friday was last Friday, and I was like, I'm going to make a post about it. Like, I'm going to sell more digital albums on Bandcamp. And then I just didn't, because I was like, I do not feel like selling something right now. Yeah, it is really tricky, because, like, as artists, I feel like we're so against the norm, like, of what is expected, like, how people operate in the societies to, like, sell more things, to buy more things. And we just want to, like, create and recreate. So I find that a lot of artists really like struggle with this. Like how do you make money and survive in this society without like denying the truth of your artistic spirit?
Yeah, and a lot of traditionally that role of the sales is the label. And the responsibility is that the label does that work. But then you have this whole history of artists being manipulated out of control of their creations by the labels. And so it's kind of like if the artist doesn't have responsibility over the sale of their product, they're really, really at risk of being bamboozled. And but then the artist who spends all of their time trying to sell the product doesn't have time to make any product. But even thinking about it as a product or as a content, these words, they're so businessy, aren't they?
Yeah.
But I guess if you want to make money off of them, then you have to think about it as a business. And if you're just happy to do it as a hobby, and in many ways, I'm kind of happy to be a hobbyist musician because the pressure of earning money that way isn't so high. I can make money in other ways than like trying to directly sell my music or perform to pay for all of my expenses. It's like in your song, try to figure out how to write songs for a living.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Writing songs for a living. Oof.
Yeah.
I haven't figured that out yet.
I don't really, I sometimes wonder, I'm like, how many artists that I listen to, how many of them actually live off of their music alone? Like, even, like, these mid-tier artists, because we know, like, how much artists actually get paid from streaming. And, like, unless you're really, you have things cut out with the venues that you're performing at, and you're not, having half your merch sales taken away from you. Like, how much money are artists actually making nowadays anyway?
Yeah.
It's such an interesting thing to think about.
And thinking about it too, just in general, like, not just artists, but creative people. There are so many discoveries made by amateurs, like in science, for example. A lot of this discoveries of magnetism and electricity were done by people who were not professional scientists at all. In fact, there weren't really much professional scientists. They were hobbyists, and they had jobs as administrators and lawyers and things like that, and poets as well. Like a lot of these poets, it's not like they're living off of being a poet. I mean, we talk about these people who are poets, like that's their profession, but they probably were living in many other ways than their poetry, making money for them to survive. If you're an artist and you have a patron, it's like a person who says, okay, I'm going to make sure that you're able to live comfortably so you can keep making stuff. That's a different relationship than selling your work. Having patronage. And I guess things like Patreon, maybe that's moving in that direction where people just can contribute in a way that's helping to sustain an artist's progression. But yeah, we do need to. I mean, it's just a mess right now, especially for musicians.
Yeah.
How to survive and how to pay for everything. I mean, and if you want to go on tour, and if you have a band, and you want to take your band on tour, oh my gosh! And everyone else has jobs, and everyone's busy. So it's really a challenge if you want to even scheduling a concert with a band in your own town can be a pain in the butt because everyone's got so much going on. Sometimes I think I would love to just get a band of like 19-year-old people to because they don't have much responsibilities yet, like get a couple of college students who don't care if they fail their classes. Let's go on tour the country.
Oh.
Because everyone else is pretty tied down with whatever they're doing.
It's not only the rose, it's the bride sitting in the parking lot of my apartment. Down on iron seats look like ash spiraling in the wind. Oh, yeah. How tender as a green stem plucked prematurely, as a petal torn from the body. Ah, how beautiful the wish that lies between fingertips, while God is stirring up the dust. The
And so yeah, I wanted to talk to you about on your album because I was listening to it a bit in preparation for our interview, and I was really enjoying a lot of the instrumentation on there. And how did you come about with these arrangements and the artists that you worked with?
Oh gosh. Trying to think back to when I wrote the arrangements.
Well, what was the time frame of this album? How long ago did you start writing it, and the production process and all of that?
Okay, so the very beginning of the album, I didn't realize it was the beginning of the album, as I feel like most songwriters would agree. Like, you don't always know. But it was at the end of 2020. I wrote the first song on the album called November. And I didn't even write it down. Like, I didn't write down the lyrics or anything. I just had a voice memo in my phone that I didn't, like, rediscover until almost a year later. And it was unnamed and everything. It was, like, new recording 15, like, from December 2020. But I feel like that is, like, where the first seed was planted still. And then I started grad school in the fall of 2021, and at the same time, I felt like I was leaning more into, like, popular music songwriting again, because I studied classical composition, and for a while, I felt like I sort of was trying to keep, like, my musical interests separate, and I was really trying to make, like, the classical composer thing work. And so I didn't want the songwriter part to be as much of my image. But in fall 2021, I rediscovered the song November, and I wrote You Were Loving Me. And I was writing a few other songs at the time that didn't make it onto the album. That's kind of like where it started. And then over the next couple years, I continued to write more songs, which also ended up on the album. In the spring of 2023 is when I was like, okay, this album is going to exist. Like, I started thinking about it the fall before. Actually, that's a lie. It was spring 2022. I had a lesson with one of my composition professors, Yotam Haber. And I was like, I've never shown any of my composition professors, like, a folk song before. And I showed him a voice memo of November and of You Were Loving Me. And he was like, why are you ignoring this part of yourself? Like, you know, what I think would be a good idea is if, for your comprehensive project, because that's, like, one of the requirements to graduate is to do a comprehensive project, he said, why don't you, like, record an album and then use your composer brain to play the role of the producer and, like, try to blend your two worlds together. It's like, because I really think that this is something special. Like, I think this is what you should lean into. So I was like, okay. I started thinking about the arrangements in, like, the fall, and then in spring 2023, started working on it. That's when I, like, at the very beginning, like, in January of 2023, I was making the arrangement. So it was like, I knew I wanted string quartet on a few of them. I was also just thinking of my friends. So my friend Benjamin Baker, he plays saxophone and bass clarinet. He plays flute too, but he didn't
Okay, so he was doing those at the end. I forget what song it was, where there's this crazy like multiphonic stuff.
Yeah,
Was that him?
Yeah, that was
okay.
Ben.
That was really cool.
And then my friend Kwan, who plays shwona and bili. Like those are just instruments that I wouldn't be able to, access otherwise. So it was really like thinking about the people that I knew, and I had worked with the grad fellowship string quartet at UMKC like the spring before, so I was like, okay, there's my string quartet. The violist did sub in, my friend Katie subbed in for viola, but the rest were a part of the fellowship quartet. And just like reaching out to professors at UMKC, like reaching out to the jazz professors, like, hey, I don't know any drummers, like, but there's a lot of good drummers at this school. Can you recommend one for this project? The pianist was another composer in our program named Jacob. And of course, like, my friend Lydia from high school, like she was on the album too. She did vocals on To Love Is To Be Honest and on May. So like it kind of like was just thinking about people that I knew more than I was thinking like I want this instrument on this song and this instrument on this song. So it started like who do I know, and then how can that fit in with these songs? Like how can all of these artists play their strengths on my songs?
So kind of like looking in the kitchen and seeing what's there, and then cooking something with what's available.
Exactly.
Yeah. Rather than waiting for like wishing that you had something that you don't have.
Yeah. So that's kind of where it started. So 2023, by the end of the semester, we had done all the recordings, and I had some rough mixes. So by May 2023. And that was enough to say it was a completed comprehensive project. But I was like, this sounds terrible. I was not happy with that at all. Perfectionism. And I had to set it aside for a bit. I was like, I'm going to get this done, and I'm going to put it out like in just a couple months later. I just need a couple months. I was so burnt out.
Yeah,
like,
you get that ear fatigue.
Yeah, well, I mean, just from grad school in general. Because at the same time that I was working on that, like, project, I was also working on my thesis. I was also making an opera film. I was also taking classes. Like, I was, like, fully doing too much. And at that point, I was like, if I don't allow myself some separation from this project, I'm just going to hate it, and I'm going to throw it away. So it was like allowing myself to have some distance and some space to be able to come back and like love the art the way that it deserves to be loved. I found that very necessary. So after a couple months, I came back to it, and I ended up finishing 2 of the songs to release them in November 2023.
Yes, the singles.
Yeah, that was To Love Is To Be Honest, and then Don't Look At Me That Way. And then I took my time finishing the rest. It got to a point, though, like I was saying, like I was in my perfectionist brain, just like, I'm never going to finish this album. And somehow it came out.
Yeah.
It's like the first project of that size that I mixed myself. So that was also a challenge.
How many tracks did you have on some of those?
Oh gosh.
I mean, the drums alone probably had quite a bit.
Yeah. I don't even know if I could count. I mean, like 60-ish.
Yeah.
You know,
quite a
like
bit.
To Love Is To Be Honest, especially because there's drums, there's a string quartet, there's vocals, there's guitar, there's like a synth bass, there's the shwona, like, and that was just like a beast of a song to mix. I was like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Why did I think this was a good idea? I am not experienced at all. Yeah. But I came, on the other side of it, like having learned so much as well.
Yeah, I feel like in those kind of moments, trying to do everything I can to cut out some of the mid-range, it seems like everything collects in the middle. It's like the mid-range just starts to bulge from all of the corresponding overlapping frequencies. It just gets that big, you know, inflated mid-range.
And then I think, well, knowing that now, I'm like, I think that I will compose arrangements differently as well, because they say, you know, a good mix starts with a good arrangement. Yeah, and just like, well, I mean, I think I was thinking about that a little bit, but it's still just some of the songs are just dense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's also a kind of, like, the magic of having all the available channels and then also wanting to, in a way, like, show what you can do. It's really a temptation to just layer and layer and layer things in one moment, have it be super dense. But more and more I listen to stuff like, I don't know, you know, James Blake or Frank Ocean or some of these artists, and they're just such sparse. They'll just be like a voice and a guitar, or just these two, but they just sound so exquisite, and a little bit of like reverb or something, and I'm like, wow, okay. So then I realized when I would be making so many layers in a way, it's like, what am I hiding from? Am I hiding from something with all these layers? Like, I'm covering up, you know, and like being naked and bare with just the voice and one instrument, or even just the voice or just an instrument. Like, that can be enough. That's enough.
Yeah.
But there's this kind of, I don't know if it's a fear or just a feeling that it needs to be more than that, and then always wanting to add all this other stuff. But I love it too, you know, it's really fun to add things. So I'm also working on that, like the arrangement. I feel like, the arrangement, that's the thing I'm really curious about when I listen to music. I'm like, what's this arrangement like? What are they doing? What's the decisions they're making? How are they starting it? How is it going in the middle? How is it finishing? Is it starting really heavy and then emptying out? There's so many different ways you can go.
Yeah.
I remember when I was first producing music, and it was almost like always following this kind of really, like, you start with one thing and then you add a layer and add a layer and add a, you know, it was just kind of like this progressive adding, and then you have a breakdown. I think it's because of electronic music.
Yeah.
It's just following this kind of progression of starting sparse, building up by adding tracks, and then cut them all out, and then like have another build, and then like a drop or something like that. But that's so formulaic, it gets really boring really quickly if that's every song you do.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to listen to songs that, I don't know, they have more of an element of surprise with the arrangement. And sometimes I wonder what it would be like to write a song that just, like, it feels like it's starting in the middle of something. Like you're just dropped right into a story. Or like the opening scene of a movie that's like already a police chase. Or something. Like I want it to feel like that sometimes.
Just right in the action immediately.
Yeah, right into the action. I have yet to make a song like that, but maybe that would be an interesting challenge.
I think that, because it's like, if you start with the action, then of course then there's only one way to go. I mean, I guess you could, unless it's action the whole way through, which in an album that could make sense, I guess, that you have this like super action song like March of the Pigs or whatever it is, and I really love, you know, Nine Inch Nails' Downward Spiral as an album. It goes through all these different emotions and feelings, and well, mostly negative emotions, but really interesting landscapes and quiet, loud, and arrangements. Yeah, like you can have this like jumping into the middle of the police chase, and then suddenly it's like the pullback to after, where the car driver's like, you know, pulls over to the side and they're hiding in the shadows as the police go by, and then like they have a moment of reflection and it's quiet. Being cinematic with it, I think is an interesting concept. Like it would be kind of fun to almost take a movie and use that to block out an arrangement, or take inspiration about a film or even another album, like just copying the arrangement. I mean, but can that get you in trouble? Like, who's getting sued by Marvin Gaye's family? Was it White Lines? Was that the song? Or Blurred Lines? Jamie, you know.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't know what it's called.
I don't remember the name of the artist, but they got sued by Marvin Gaye's family because they had the same vibe as a Marvin Gaye song, I think.
Yeah, that's a tricky ground to walk on. Like, who owns what anymore? But I feel like if it's like an emotional arc, like that can be so general,
Right?
That I feel like it's not. I mean, you can take inspiration from something. I feel like if you're taking inspiration from anything, you should probably just say this inspired me. But as long as you're not like plagiarizing,
right? Anyway, interesting stuff usually takes from more than one source, right? Like if the person only listened to Nirvana, then all the music sounds just like a copy of Nirvana. That's not interesting. But if they listen to Nirvana and then they listen to, I don't know, Strauss, and they listen to some German minimal techno, you know, and then they mixed it all together.
Yeah.
That might be more interesting.
That would be interesting.
What are some of your musical influences?
Oh gosh. I feel like it always changes, but two people tend to remain in my like sphere of influence, and that's Joni Mitchell, obviously, and Jeff Buckley. But I feel like saying Joni Mitchell, some people say, oh, I'm so influenced by Joni Mitchell, and it's like her first 3 albums or something, first 4 albums maybe. But I'm like, she has a whole life of work in like different genres, and I'm really influenced by like the full scope of her release.
Like her career.
Yeah, so it's like, I like her folky stuff, and I like her like jazz rock stuff, and, you know, the 80s, like, you know, it's like synth pop, almost arrangements, and her jazzy, you know, jazz stuff with Herbie Hancock and.
I didn't even know about that, but I'm curious now.
Yeah.
What era of Herbie was that? Like around Chameleon and all that, like Headhunters era, Herbie Hancock, like electro stuff, or.
No, I think
more
it's
like just playing keys.
With Hancock, I think it's a little bit later. Herbie Hancock did like a whole album of her music with a lot of different artists, and
he was like a producer.
Yeah, there's an arrangement of her song "Tea Leaf Prophecy" on that album. I think it's called River, Letters to Joni or something. But I mean, she worked with him. She did an album with Charles Mingus, which is really good. Which I think is more like Mingus musically and Joni lyrically. But yeah, she's done a little bit of everything, and I'm really inspired by that. I think just like that creative spirit of always wanting to do something different, always like following her curiosity. So that inspires me. Like her philosophy and her sound really inspire me. And then Jeff Buckley, like, what do you even say about Jeff Buckley? I think all the time, I've been listening to Sketches from My Sweetheart the Drunk a lot, and that, like, you know, unreleased, unfinished album is really inspiring a lot of what I'm writing right now, like that part of Jeff Buckley that we didn't really get to fully see. But I feel like there's just such a breadth of color in his voice. I think we've talked about this before, actually, like the masculinity and the femininity in his voice, and like there's just like a whole spectrum of color. And so I really strive for that in my performance, like that kind of intensity where you could listen and be like, I feel like I'm listening to this man crying. Like, that's how I feel about Jeff Buckley sometimes. And so I really strive for that as well. But I also take a lot of influence from some classical composers as well. I mean, studying classical composition for 6 years, I would hope that there's some influence. I was thinking earlier today about Mahler, who I feel like a lot of people know him for his symphonies, but when I took voice lessons in undergrad, I learned some of his Kindertotenlieder, which is like songs for dead children.
Whoa, okay. Interesting.
He had a very traumatic life, to say the least, and he wrote about it. But the thing that draws me to Mahler is like the way that he presents complex emotions, like energetically and texturally in his music. So he might have just like this very turbulent portion of a song, but it ends like a lullaby.
Hmm.
And I find that very inspiring to have like high contrast like that and just very like true emotion in music and just like dark, harmonic writing as well. There's so many people that I could talk about, but I feel like, every day that you listen to something, as an artist, I would hope that you're being inspired a little bit every day. So I try to be inspired by something a little bit every day, and it's not always the same people.
Do you find it hard to listen to music sometimes when you're working to create music?
Yes, and I feel like it's more of like not like I'm trying to block anyone out, because I know some artists will, like, they can't listen to music while they're working because they feel like it's going to taint their vision or something or get in the way. For me, it's more about like over and under stimulation from music. So I'm working on a lot of projects, and I mean, just from explaining like my experience in grad school as well, I have a hard time like balancing my creative work. So I'm either working on like a lot at the same time or like not really a whole lot. There's not really like a healthy medium, which
so it's feast or famine.
Yeah, I need to work on that balance. But yeah, when I'm working, I'm like really working on a lot of stuff at the same time, and so then going to listen to music, it has to be very intentional. I have to know exactly what I want to listen to. Otherwise, I'm just not going to feel like listening to anything. Yeah. Or I'm going to try to listen to something and be like, I can't give this the attention it deserves right now because I'm either overstimulated or understimulated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really a challenge sometimes when you're working on music and creating to like take that time to listen to other music, because it's like you might only have so much time in your day, and so if you're a musician and you have another job that you're doing, you got to do that, and then you have this little bit of time where you can work. Or even if music is your job and you have a full day, you're still busy and you still don't get everything done, because it's like you might not be making money, but you're working on all these different projects. And then so having the time to sit and listen to other music can sometimes be a real challenge. I mean, driving is a great time. When you're going somewhere, you kind of have to. Say. Or I really like to, when I'm like making dinner, I like to listen to music and things like that. You try to find time to listening to music, because it definitely helps to listen to music that's not mine when I'm making my own.
Yeah. I find that when I'm working on projects, like at the beginning of a project, I will intentionally listen to things that I expect to inspire me. So it's kind of like having a temp track or something. Like, if I'm going to work on a film, I want to know like kind of the vibe that I'm going for before I write it. So I'll like think, I'm going to be inspired by, like, I mean, for example, I worked on a short film earlier this year, and I was like, okay, I'm going to be inspired by Loewe and the soundtrack to La La Land and Bernard Herrmann, like, soundtracks. And, like, that was, like, and, like, mid-century pop. Like,
your
things
references.
like that. Yeah, so, like, having references and, like, listening at the beginning of a project. But then after that point, while I'm still working on the same project, I feel like I can't go back and listen to those things very often. I have to listen to something completely different. So, like, while working on that project, I think I was listening to, like electronic music, like, ambient, like, stuff like that. And it's interesting because it's so different, but then it's like planting a seed for a later project. Because then, like, I mean, right now I feel like that listening to like electronic and ambient earlier in the year is helping me work on an ambient folk project now.
Right.
So it's like whenever I'm listening, I'm expecting that it's going to come back to me in some way, even if it doesn't seem directly relevant in the present moment.
Yeah, it seems like in a way the music that we listen to is a kind of map or a guide to what we want to create. Yeah, I find that a lot for myself. Like when I was learning all these Turkish and Balkan songs, I was listening obsessively to Turkish and Balkan music. And then I was able to write a Turkish song just spontaneously because I listened to so much of it. But now I don't really listen to it at all because I'm not there. And I'm not around people who also enjoy that music. So now I'm listening to all this American folk music, it's old time songs, because that's where I am. So I feel like when I'm in a place, I want to learn the music there. And so now I'm learning all this folk music from here, and I'm getting really obsessed. But and to the point where I bought a banjo and a fiddle just to be able to understand this music more and be able to play it in a more authentic way. And yeah, so I'm following that obsession, which means that probably I'm going to be, if I'm writing songs, they're going to be more inspired by that kind of angle. Yeah, but I'm also listening a lot to ambient music, and I haven't made any lately. But there was like for a period of about like a year and a half, I was making a lot of that, like experimental electronic music, and then I just got so bored of electronic music. I got so tired of it that now I'm just only interested in acoustic instruments again, and it's like I don't want to buy a synth. I want to buy a violin. I want to buy accordion. I don't care. I want to get real like acoustics generating instruments, stuff that makes real live sounds. And I don't know if it's just like I'm getting tired of everything being in the box and artificial, and I want to be more authentic and real. I have a loop pedal, for example, and I never use it. I don't feel authentic to play a bunch of loops and I feel like I want to have everything that I do be live. And I wish I could have was like an octopus or something, and I could play all those instruments at once. Yeah. Because that would be nice, but right now it's like no, I don't want to like layer a bunch of loops in front of people and play over it. I don't want to pre-record a backing track and then play over it, because I want to be able to change the tempo and the tone with what's going on.
Yeah, it really does. There's no right or wrong way to do anything, but it really comes down to like what feels most true to you at a point in time, and I get that. But I think it is really interesting because you're like, whereas all of those, like having a looper pedal could really like expand your sound because you can have all these layers, but in some ways it's limiting. Yeah. But in the same way, just being you, one person with no looping, that can be a limitation too. But I don't know. Either way, like limitations are, great for pushing us to our creative limits, because problem solving is a creative pursuit. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because like here's the thing about it. It's like the songs that I've already written, if I try to play them with the loop pedal, it kind of doesn't make sense. But then I've done experiments where I've improvised and just generated sounds and used the loop pedal much more experimentally, and that was really fun. So using it as an experimental kind of tool where I'm generating new music on the fly and improvising and just creating something from scratch works really well. But when it's a song that I've already like been playing a lot just with my guitar, I don't want to go through it with the looper. Yeah. So I guess maybe it has to do with using those tools in the creation moment rather than adding them after. Yeah. If you're writing a song with a looper and that's how you wrote the song, it's going to be really good because you conceived of it that way. Yeah. So, because I don't want to talk badly about people using loops or even background tracks. I've seen amazing artists that have that stuff. Although it's really frustrating, I think, to watch a performance where you cannot see the music being made as it's being made. Like, I really want to watch the sound happen. It's important. It's like I want everything to be generated in that moment. Yeah. I mean, I know that it's people have a vision and they want to have this like certain sound and they want to perform that way, but I think that there's something brave about not doing that.
Yeah, true.
So your themes of decay and everything, you were talking about that with your song Dust, for example, and you in the concert that we played, you made a little talk about how you wanted to kind of bring up more of the beautiful side of decay. So could you talk more about that, like where that comes from, what your inspiration is on that?
Yeah. I guess the inspiration is that I exist, that anyone exists. Yeah, my inspiration to talk about like the poetry of decay. I guess it just comes from existing. Because everyone decays, everything decays. But mostly like being a young person with a disability, I feel like it's really important to create about my experiences as a disabled person. And I mean specifically, I have a degenerative muscle disease, and so like the intimate relationship with decay has just become sort of a metaphor for like acceptance in a way. I had to like personify the property of decay to feel like I could approach it. And like, I mean, a lot of my life has been spent like just trying to integrate myself with myself, if that makes any sense at all. Because, you know, we think about like mind and body as separate things sometimes, or people think like mind, body, and soul are all separate. But you know, and they try to like overcome one thing as a way of, you know, elongating something else. But I feel like to be most at peace for me personally, I want to integrate those three things with each other. So like mind, body, and soul as a singular entity. And so that's where like this whole poetry of decay idea in my music comes from, because I'm like, okay, I'm writing honestly about my bodily experience, and because I'm writing honestly about my bodily experience, I'm also writing about my spiritual experience at the same time. And I feel like that's why it's like poetic. So like the decay is like the material or just like biological like process, and then the poetry that comes with it is like the spiritual essence that sort of, you know, resonates from that. Yeah.
So when you're thinking about the linkage between these three different realms, is it kind of like a sense of, is it sort of like there's a transference between them? For example, the more the body decays, the more the spirit becomes strong. In a way, like there's a kind of transference, or like there's only so much of this energy and it's moving around between them, or is it that like they're all linked together? And you know, I mean, I think everyone's looking at them as there's these separate things, and like when it comes to, for example, like disability, I was thinking about Stephen Hawking, who is, you know, who is like a very famous figure in physics and cosmology and stuff like that, and the way that he was, you know, not even able to speak. He had to use a little computer, but he lived for a long time as a disabled person, completely unable to move any part of his body hardly at all. I mean, I don't even know what his extent of his movement was. He was basically just in his chair and had a little computer talk for him, and yet he was so enlightened about all these other things, and it's almost like, would he have even gotten to that point of his knowledge about the cosmos if he hadn't had the disability, is it kind of like, they say when people are visually impaired, the other senses come up. So is there something like that where when our body decays, is it like because there's a growth in another section of our existence, like in the spirit realm or in the mind realm?
I don't know. That is interesting to think of. But, I think Stephen Hawking had his intelligence before the disability came about. I actually think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Stephen Hawking had ALS.
Yeah.
So it'd be sort of kind of like a similar process to what I've experienced, except much more extreme. Because that's also a neuromuscular condition. But you do wonder, like, does a physical limitation propel you in some other direction? It can, I think. I think that I've experienced that with creativity. Like, I wouldn't pursue certain creative directions if I could play guitar like an atypical body or a biotypical, however you want to say that.
Right.
Someone with a typical body. Because the reason why I use alternate tunings is because my hands are weak. And I feel like finding interesting shapes that work for my hands, like that is like a physical necessity, but it is also like a creative and that's like spiritual, like exploration as well. So it's like, I don't know, I think there is some give and take and some push and pull, but in general, when I'm thinking about everything, it's more that I'm accepting everything as it is. It's not about trying to extend anything at all. Because like that's my problem with the way that a lot of people talk about disability and death, is that there's a fear. There's a fear of the limitation of the physical body. And that's why we, hope to believe that there's something that comes after. We want to extend our consciousness, we want to extend our ego, when there's no like certainty around that at all. And so like just accepting the body's physical limitations feels spiritual because it makes me present. If that makes any sense at all. It's like I'm not trying to extend anything, but now I have like this wealth of information. I had this rich experience of the present because I'm not trying to think about extending consciousness beyond what it is.
Right. And
there is no mind without the body, there is no soul without the body. Right? Like
it's kind of, there's also, it's this kind of way of thinking about it is really helpful to people who have been able-bodied, because everyone is a step away from having some disability happening. It's just a guarantee. And as a person approaches later years, something's going to fail, and that can be really traumatic and frightening to lose ability, to lose our ability to think or remember or to walk or our joints able to move or there's so many things that can go wrong with the body, and a person's going to have something happen to them no matter what. And I go through so many days where I'm just like, I feel some pain or I notice something and I'm wondering, well, what direction will this go?
Is this going to be my new normal?
Is this going to be my new normal? Yeah, I have some ringing in my ear. It happened one day and it's there.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, all right, I got to adjust to that now. And I've heard people have, ended their lives because of that. Yeah. Because they had a ringing in their ear and they couldn't handle it. It's like, I'm not perfect anymore. I'm going to destroy it all. It's like, well, okay. Figure out what you can do.
Yeah, and it's not to say that people shouldn't grieve either. But I actually think that allowing yourself to be present in your grief is kind of like that mind, body, soul integration that we're talking about anyway. And allowing yourself to be present in grief while you're losing a part of your physical body, I think
Mm-hmm.
is a spiritual experience.
Mm-hmm.
You're not denying what is true. Like, it all comes down to that, like, embracing what is true and not trying to make your reality anything other than what it
Mm-hmm.
actually is. And I think that's what poetry does, too. It just, like, I don't know if you read much contemporary poetry, but I feel like that's what poetry is about, just, like, noticing. And noticing is such a spiritual activity to me.
I do like poetry, although there's so much poetry that I haven't liked, so it has to be the right kind of poetry, I suppose. But
Yeah.
I do enjoy it when it hits the right way.
Yeah.
I really like reading the poems of Walt Whitman and like Allen Ginsberg.
Yeah.
Who are some poets that you really like?
This is probably going to sound basic to people listening to this who know anything about poetry, but I really do like Mary Oliver, and I think she is one of those poets that can talk about just the state of human existence in such a simple way that is yet so profound.
I've never heard of Mary Oliver, so
You've never heard of
No.
Mary Oliver?
Sleeping
Okay, maybe I'm
in
not
the
basic,
Forest
but I think
by Mary
it's probably
Oliver.
a basic answer.
yeah.
I thought the earth remembered me. She took me back so tenderly, arranging her dark skirts, her pockets full of lichens and seeds. I slept as never before, a stone on the riverbed, nothing between me and the white fire of the stars, but my thoughts, and they floated light as moths among the branches of the perfect trees. All night I heard the small kingdoms breathing around me, the insects, and the birds who do their work in the darkness. All night I rose and fell, as if in water, grappling with a luminous doom. By morning, I had vanished at least a dozen times into something better. The Uses of Sorrow by Mary Oliver. In my sleep, I dreamed this poem. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this, too, was a gift.
Poetry is so subjective to what you need,
Yeah. Well,
what speaks to you.
like anything else, everything is subjective to what you need. But
What about oh shoot, what's her name? Emily Dickinson.
I do like Emily Dickinson. You know, it's interesting that you bring her up because I tend to think of her as like kin in a way, being like a young woman who very likely had chronic illness or mental illness of some sort, potentially queer, like I really do enjoy her work. I actually have set one of her poems as a choral piece. And I feel like she's one of the poets that really like inspired me to write more about disability experience in a strange way. Because she would talk about like death and like the fear but also the not fear of death. Like
Mhm.
I'm not afraid to know what it is.
Yeah.
No one knows what it is, but it happens anyway. The sun keeps setting, like
Mm-hmm.
the dew keeps dropping, like all of these things are just processes of life.
I mean, sometimes I'm just thinking about how much of a relief death really is, because all the stress of life just goes away and you're left with none of it. And the people who suffer in death are the ones who are still alive.
Yeah.
And the one
Yeah.
who's died, they're all good. They're all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So I feel, like when my grandmother died recently, I was so ready for her to die because she was not enjoying anymore. If she couldn't even eat a piece of cake, that's like one of the last things a person can enjoy when they're, when you're getting old. What's left? Some sweets, basically. There's not much more to look forward to. I mean, I've been to some weddings and it's just like you look at when the cake comes out and all the old people are getting at it. That's like one of the last joys, is just to eat some sweet thing. And she couldn't even enjoy that. You know, she didn't even want to drink water. And at that point, it's kind of, it's like, okay, you're done. You know, I don't want you to stick around anymore, because it's worse for you to stick around. It's better if you just, you know, close it up. Close up the shop.
You know, I think that brings up an interesting point, though, because that can be, you know, a comforting thought to have. Like, when I die, I'm going to be relieved of all this stress. But I think that can also be a very dangerous thought as well. But what you were saying about, you know, what elderly people find joy in their old age, I feel like that's something to learn from even as a young person. Like, when I feel like shit about my life, like, where do I find joy? I'm gonna have a piece of cake, and I'm really gonna enjoy it. Like, I'm gonna, like, savor this. And again, that's poetry. Like, that experience to me is poetry.
Right.
Like, noticing and paying attention to small things, and, like, in the midst of your sea of grief or melancholy or whatever, where are you finding joy? In a piece of cake. I would like to find joy in a piece of cake.
So maybe coming back to our discussion at the beginning about the journaling, when you're pouring all the shit out, and it would be nice to finish it off with maybe the gratitude or the thinking of something joyful. I feel like I'm like that in conversations a lot of times, when it gets into a dark turn and start obsessing over the way the world is and the powers that be, and feeling that sense of helplessness and a lot of I mean, now, like, even, you know, with these elections coming up, this sort of sense that no matter what choice you make, nothing's going to be good, and that all the options are ridiculous, and yet and then it's like, okay, but you know what do I have control over? What are the things that we can do, not to just be stomped down by all of that negativity? Like, we can't ignore it. We have to recognize it and in a way honor its existence. Like, okay, I see you. And then in a way a redirection, or like a remembering that that's just like an aspect. Because I think like music that's completely happy is boring. And no one wants to watch a film where the protagonist has a great day and nothing bad happens.
You'd be surprised.
I mean, is there such a film? Is there such a film?
I don't know.
I mean, even a Miyazaki movie has problems, you know? Like, I don't think that a good story could exist without some kind of difficulty. I don't think a person would stand it. They wouldn't stand for it. Maybe like a children's show, like Teletubbies or something, can get away with it, but...
But even then, I feel like there has to be some sort of conflict.
Yeah, Tinky Winky's purse got missing. Oh no, we have to find it. You know?
Yeah. You know, I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, like this concept of gratitude or joy or whatever it is in the midst of everything else. Because you can't turn off anything. You can only, like, choose what to open yourself to, really. And I think that blocking out too much of anything can be harmful, because you can just, like, suppress. And
the pressure builds up.
Yeah, but
if you redirect, it's more like taking that energy and like channeling it in a different way.
Yeah.
Rather than blocking it, it's like using it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually been reading this book of essays by a writer called Rilke. Do you know Rilke? He's like a poet and writer and teacher, and he writes about joy. His book is called The Book of Delights, and basically this book is a collection of essays. He challenged himself to write like one short essay a day in like his 42nd year or something, like starting on his birthday. And he didn't write every day, but the idea was that he was going to write about something delightful every day as a way to like cultivate that practice of noticing like things that are delightful, which I've been thinking of trying since, you know, we talked about I read a lot about negative emotions. But one thing he says is really interesting is, like, what is joy? And joy is like that mutual recognition that we're all going to die. Like, that is kind of how he defines it. I mean, those aren't his exact words, but it's something along those lines. Like, joy isn't ignoring oppression or any of the other horrible, horrible things that happen in the world. Joy is like this mutual recognition that we're both gonna die, but right now we're alive together.
Right, like
And
the preciousness and the very little tiny amount of time we actually have.
Yeah, and just like that mutual respect of another person or seeing their humanness. And I think thinking about joy in that way, I don't know, it has enriched my life in the short amount of time that I've been reading his essays, because like on the other side of melancholy, like there's always something brighter, but they're attached to each other, and they live together, they coexist, I guess.
Yeah, I think a worthwhile creative piece has a good spectrum of feeling in it. When it comes to a film or a book or a song, I like it when it takes you through different territories and exposes a lot of different feelings, and then it feels more like a complete work, that it's touching a lot of emotions. And in a way, the emotions are like a palette, and if you always focus on just one color, then it's very monochromatic, which could be interesting. I mean, like the Downward Spiral, Nine Inch Nails is like all in this one. It's like a monochromatic emotional palette, which works for that album. After a while, I got bored of it, but but in that album, it really hits somehow, and yeah, to have that, because just one emotion by itself, okay, you can make an homage to that emotion, but to dwell on it all the time is not a complete human experience. It's like not a full picture, and if you want to get the full picture, you need to have a little bit from all of these colors. I mean, maybe just a little tiny piece from that color and more of this one, but it has that contrast that's really makes the work have more depth.
I've been writing a lot recently. Like, I have a set coming up, and I am specifically singing like songs on disability topics for this set. And I bring this up because I wrote a song, and I was trying specifically to write something more positive, like a sort of like body positive song about like, dancing as a form of care, and like all bodies deserve to be appreciated, as a way to like embrace the disabled body and see like value in it. And I showed it to a friend, and this friend, I trust them so much, like, with my music. Like, I know they wouldn't lie to me. So I showed it to them. So I was like, I think I like this song, but I'm really not sure. And they were like, it doesn't feel like you. Like, it doesn't feel like something that you would write.
Too happy.
Pretty much. And I was like, well, I was trying to write something that's not depressing. And they're like, I think you need to stop calling your music depressing. Like, yeah, maybe there are elements of melancholy, but like it's not depressing. And they were saying, like, I think that there would be some value if you complicated the emotion just a little bit. Because I was talking about things like, bless the hands that practice care, like, dancing is a form of care, like, and they were saying, why don't you beg a little? Like, are you gonna dance with me? Like, and I was like, okay. But again, like, this is just one example of kind of what we're saying. Like, when you complicate the emotion, it feels so much more true.
Yeah.
Like, if I just tried to make the song work and just be positive, I'm sure that friend would have been like, yeah, it's a great song. Like, I'm still really proud of you. But I'm glad that they pushed me in the direction that's like, no, complicate the emotion. because that's what the song needed.
Right.
And then I like tweaked it a bit and I rewrote the texture, and now it feels like a song that I wrote, not a song that I was trying to write to please this audience that, or the expectation of this audience, whatever expectation I thought that they had for me.
Yeah, because it's like when it's this very basic kind of one-dimensional thing, it's almost like propaganda or sales, marketing. It's so one-dimensional that it's flat, and it doesn't have it. Yeah, it doesn't have the depth, and propaganda is just like that. It's like, we don't want you to even consider the other side being valid, but a poet is going to take the side that's opposite of theirs and try to really understand it and personify it and bring it in before they maybe reveal some other oppositions. And I think that's what's really interesting about, really good songs, is that they get you really questioning, and suddenly you're on the side of the murderer, or you're just really, it's really flipping things around. And that's how life is. I mean, everyone's got a perspective, and all the sides have a reason why they exist, and there's someone who believes that they're right. And so acknowledging that is an important part. It's like getting into the head of the other person who disagrees.
Yeah.
And I think we're missing that a lot in the discourse about a lot of topics. So many people are against one another. And I'm like, well, when I talk to you, I can really feel how you feel. And then when I talk to this other person who's opposite of you, I can feel how they feel. But then how do I reconcile that? Because I can be with a person in the moment that they're explaining their sensibilities, and then I can be with another person and be with them in the moment they're explaining, and yet, like, how can I it's like I'm holding these contradictory perspectives in my brain at almost at the same time, really. I mean, I don't know. But then when those two people are in an argument, then I don't know what to do. It's like, I want to support you both in a way, and I also think you're both assholes. I mean, that's kind of where it comes down to sometimes. It's like, there's like beautiful and ugly behaviors, and we can't divorce them from one another.
I think that's why the artist is so important. And I don't mean that in like an egotistical way, like I'm important. But the artist is like somebody who will hold contradictory emotions or perspectives and just like create a vessel for empathy. And I think that's really the purpose of art, is to just reflect like the human condition and the human experience and make people ask questions. Like, I think that's what good art does. People argue all the time, like, what is good art? And typically it has something to do with aesthetic or perfection. But I think good art, it makes people ask questions. Yeah.
I like the role of the court jester who was able to ridicule the monarch without being penalized. They were able to say anything, and that was just okay, because that's their role, is to offer that opposite. And the artist, in many ways, I mean, there's like a tradition of the clown, the bard, and this kind of practice of being a mirror to everything. And when you are a mirror, it's showing a lot of pretty ugly things sometimes, right? But in a way, like, well, are they ugly things? Or are they things that we've been taught to think are ugly? But they're just a part of us. I mean, all of this war, all of this murder and death, yeah, it's terrible. And also, maybe it's a function of our reality too. I don't know. Like, humans have been killing each other for millennia. Why? Is it a purpose? Is it something that we've developed to make sure we don't overpopulate the planet? Is it a way that makes sure that people have an ability to survive because they're always able to, fight and defend? Why is that developed? And I don't have true answers. I mean, it's like, would I survive in a war?
No.
Well, what kind of war? I mean, the war now, what is the war now even? Is it even on a battlefield? I mean, I know what's going on with Israel and Palestine, that's a war, but then there's also, like, that war is not just in the battlefield, it's also in our brains. There's all of these messages, and the battlefield is Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and ABC News and Fox News and all of that too. So it's interesting that what is the war? Battlefield.
Yeah, I don't know, but I feel like, along those lines, like war, I think war is a projection of human greed more than it is anything else. Like, the function of war is always about, like, who has the power and who believes that they have the right to power. And I don't want it to be a part of human truth.
But when we look at like historical conflict, not this kind of mechanized warfare, but I'm thinking about intertribal conflicts over resources and things like that thousands and thousands of years ago, I can see how that might exist because, for example, a river or some herd of bison or some other resource that would be necessary for survival, and a group would be fighting another group over that in order to survive. And so there's like this kind of need for protecting your little clan, your little pocket of DNA. It's almost like an innate thing. And so that instinct happened in a way to perpetuate survival. But now it's been completely
corrupted,
turned into something like mechanized. It's like it's kind of the same thing that happens with AI. It already happened with mechanized weapons.
And that's all capitalism.
Yeah, because like, for example, gangs, street gangs used to, just be in the neighborhood youth, and sometimes they'd get into some brawls with the other gangs. Maybe once in a while someone would die in a knife fight, but not very often. It was not very common that people would die. They would get into fights. And now, with all these guns and everything, the conflicts have become deadly. But that's like a modern development. They wouldn't normally be that intense. But who do I know? Maybe 50,000 years ago, they would just be doing it with spears and lattle or stones, and who knows? I mean,
I wasn't there.
Yeah, I wasn't there. It's like this capacity for violence. It's like I'm kind of like, because I really love learning traditional things, traditional methods and traditional music, and learning about these old ways. But then I think about how much like abuse and just terrible behaviors exist even now, but even back then, like between parents and their children, and in between family members and between neighbors. And it's like, well, I can't really hope for the good old days, because in those days things were pretty awful in a lot of ways too. But is it any better or worse now? I don't know. Or is it more like some things are better and some things are worse, and it kind of averages out?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't really say because we weren't there, but I tend to think that things are probably about the same. I don't know. I'm of the mind that we have some illusions that things are good, but there are still people pulling strings, and there's a lot of violence that we don't get to see that's motivated by people who liked us. But that's my hot take.
Right.
I don't know if that should go in this podcast.
I know. Yeah, I mean, we're getting off the rails a little bit, but yeah, it's frustrating because it's like such a confusing it's such a confusing landscape of information, which is why the poets are so necessary to convey in a way like that confusion, and to show the confusion as a state of true observation. It's like the place of the poet is to be like, nothing makes sense. And that's the most sensible way to look at it. And you're mad if you think that everything has a reason. And you're mad if you think that things are the way that they're depicted on these screens and in these writings. That's just what's been thrown at us.
Yeah. Like the poet's job is not to make fiction out of reality. It's simply just to point things out that maybe we don't want to look at. I mean, and of course, poets and artists can make fiction. But in general, like the artist is kind of tasked with reflecting the times, reflecting states of humanity, making us think about things that we don't want to think about.
It seems to me that it's kind of funny that, like the powers that be are so busy crafting fictions that are being presented as truth. But then the poet can craft a story that's an obvious fabrication and be more true. Because they're openly saying, well, this is a creation, but this is how it looks. So metaphor can be really powerful for exhibiting a lot of the hypocrisies and contradictions in our society. So you said you have a gig coming up. Is this the one on the streetcar?
It's not on the streetcar,
Okay.
but it's like near a streetcar stop.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of like in collaboration with the streetcar. It's called Art in the Loop.
Okay, I thought it was going to be on the streetcar as a
No,
performance.
there are some performers this season who have performed on the streetcar, but not me.
Okay.
I get to be still.
So how is it? I mean, we can talk a little bit also because we were talking about a little bit about disability, and as a performer, as an artist, we were like dealing with this a little bit when we were looking for a place to play a concert with accessibility and things like that. What's your experience with that?
So far, I mean, it's been a challenge because part of it is, I think part of it is internalized ableism of just not wanting to ask for accommodation at all and like immediately already feeling like a burden. And that's just because sometimes you enter a space that's not intended for you to participate in it, and then you don't feel like you can ask to participate. And that's not even any reflection on the venue or the people who own it to begin with, because I haven't even asked, right?
Right.
But so like half the battle for me is the courage, and just, you know, getting the support from people around me to understand that I am not a burden and that I do deserve to play shows. But my experience since has been pretty good. I mean, I played a show at the Rhino, and they got a temporary ramp, and we're in conversation about more permanent access solution for the stage. The venue itself is great, like access-wise. It's just as a performer, things tend to be a little bit tricky. And again, it's like, you know, when you're an indie musician, you're playing at a lot of, you know, independent venues as well, and it does cost money to create accessibility. It does cost money. And so I try not to, like, fault anyone who hasn't gotten there yet. But it is a challenge to, I mean, again, this is an example of, like, conflict or, like, tension that is not necessarily, like, negative. It is just, like, a fact. When I introduce my truth to a space, it creates conflict because the standard is not accessible. And so that's not, like, necessarily a negative thing. I'm not a burden, and that's something that I've had to learn. But also, the people who own the venue and who run the venue are not bad people.
Right.
There's just a conflict because of the space, and the space does not accommodate my existence. Anyway, that's just like a really long-winded way of saying it's been complicated, but I think that we're making progress. I have played a few shows, and I think that playing for Art in the Loop is going to be a big step toward visibility. Because I think half the problem is that people just don't know that disabled performers exist and that we want to play.
Right.
Like, there's just not, that many in mainstream culture, and there's not a lot of people showing up in the local community with visible disabilities, at least.
I was just thinking about how it's like Perlman, I think, is coming into Kansas City.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Who I think that was probably the first disabled musician I ever remember knowing about, because he was on Sesame Street. He was playing the violin and had his crutches, and it was like, oh. And that was pretty cool that Sesame Street was giving visibility and teaching about that. I mean, I feel like, shows like Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers did a lot to expose people to a lot of different types of people and showing ways to get along. I mean, it's kind of like in that intersectionalism too, because also you're a disabled performer and a woman performer who are also misrepresented, or not misrepresented, underrepresented. Like, there's just, you go to any open mic night and it's like a lot of guys.
A lot of
guys, which is fine. I mean, I'm glad that they're there, but I just know that there's a lot of musical women because I've met so many. But then when I get out there, I'm wondering where they are. And I don't know if this is a thing about just like going out at night as a woman. It is different than going out as a dude. I mean, I didn't understand that for a long time, but then I had to learn, about that, how different it is.
Yeah, it is very interesting, especially like as a disabled woman. Like in some regard, I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I could totally like obliterate somebody if I just charged at them fast enough with my chair.
Run them over.
Like, for context, I have a power chair. Like, yeah, that would hurt. But at the same time, like, I feel like some people might see me as like a target because I am a vulnerable person. Like, I'm a disabled woman. But yeah, I don't know why we don't really see many women out at the open mics, but at least the ones that I go to, it's predominantly like men or mask presenting people. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I lost my train of thought.
Sure. I mean, it's just like something to ponder about, because is it like, I mean, I feel like, I don't know. I mean, I think it can be easy to be like, well, yeah, that's not good. But it's not like, I don't feel like the guys are all like, we don't want any girls here. This is a boys only club. I don't, it's not like that. I feel like, from what I see, when women do come to these spaces, they're really, really excited about it. Like, guys are like, yeah, good. They really encourage it. So it's not like the spaces are hostile, as far as I can tell. But I mean, I'm not, it's not my experience personally.
Yeah,
so.
It might be similar to kind of how I was explaining what it's like to be a disabled person in spaces that are not like built for me to exist in. And because I think you could think of any space as like a conceptual space as well. And so like, are these spaces actively fostered to include women or like feminine perspectives? Or do women just come into them feeling a general sense of discomfort, not because anyone's a bad person or acting hostile, but because the space has been fostered and cultivated for that male presence.
So yeah, so it's there's like a lack of feeling of safety, in which I guess also not just for women but for trans, non-binary people as well. I mean, there is this kind of trend in a lot of events I've gone to where they're even creating these kind of spaces, like so people can feel more comfortable who are not in the mask presenting way, or just like kind of wanting to make these safe spaces. And sometimes I'm like, well, I'm not doing anything against anyone. Like, why are you want to exclude me? But it's like, well, it's not really like that. It's just more that people don't feel safe in an environment that is just catering towards this side of experience, and they want to make an effort to make a place for people to feel comfortable.
Yeah, I guess it's like anything else. These are really like complex topics that I don't think that we would really get a straight answer for, or ever have a straight answer for. And at the end of it, all you can really do is like try to be the most inviting person. Like make yourself a space, like I'm a conceptual space, and just try to be the most welcoming and inviting that you can possibly be.
Yeah.
And if you're carrying that energy and then you enter like an actual physical space, you are going to like transmit some of that energy into the space. And I mean, when it comes to like, making a place where people feel safe, I think that's really necessary to always enter somewhere with the intention of being like an open vessel.
I like that, this conceptual space making ability of a person, that a place is a place, a room is a room, but the person or people in there are creating it together. They're co-creating. Yeah, so and then maybe one of the factors is that when people join a space and they don't feel like their contribution is heard, then they feel that space is hostile to them. And when they join a space and they feel like their presence is heard, it is felt, and that their contributions are welcome, and that they get integrated into that space by the other people there, then they feel more safe. I know I feel the same way in certain spaces. I'm like, well, this is just a clique of these guys all like, at some open mic, they might all be outside and only come in to listen to each other's songs, and then go outside when someone else plays that they don't know, and it's like, yeah, that's not very hospitable either, What are we creating here? Are we creating a community, or are we creating cliques that don't have any care for anyone outside of their immediate little group? And I can see a lot how that could be disturbing for people.
Yeah, it is really interesting to think about, because I feel like I've had conversations adjacent to this with a couple people recently, and just thinking about like, is there a community here in Kansas City, like especially for creatives? And I tend to be a person that says yes, there is community, and a lot of people say I feel like the social fabric is just so flimsy, like or but something that I think people should understand is that community isn't like something that falls into your lap. It's something that you are. Like you are the community.
Yeah, it's a process.
So like you have to show up giving what you want to receive. And you also, if you show up with your cynicism, it's also not, you're not going to get what you want out of the interaction, because there's going to be a wall there. And you just have to be prepared for like to misinterpret some of your interactions as rejection, and to like process that, and then understand that it wasn't like actual real rejection. It was just you learning someone's energy, or interacting with a person whose personality you're not used to. And it's not to say that you should just let your guard down either. But I think that people really need to understand that if there's a certain kind of community that they want to see, they have to be it. Like community, you can't just like enter a space and automatically expect that it's what you want it to be.
Yeah, and it takes time. It's really a kind of weaving, where the more loops you pass, the stronger it is.
Yeah, and anytime that somebody new comes into that community, that's a shift, like in the energy and the dynamic. Like anytime you add another personality to the group, like you are going to have to do the work again.
Right. Which is maybe why people want to be in cliques. They don't want to do that work all the time. They're maxed out.
Yeah, I don't know. But I think just keeping that mindset of you are the community, I think that would benefit a lot of people, and we'd see like those stronger social fabrics that people are really longing for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely feel that a lot of this is a result of what happened with COVID and all of the lockdowns and things, and people suddenly got really introverted and into staying at home, which in many ways is very healthy to like enjoy being at home. I like that. But yeah, I think a lot of people are still struggling to reconnect with the greater community socially. But we can. I think a lot of people are really interested in it. It seems like a topic that's coming out in a lot of conversations, and how to make community again, and how to foster it.
There's a hunger for genuine connection, but I think the thing that people aren't prepared for in genuine connection, because again that implies like truth of experience, is that people are different than you. And that's always just kind of something uncomfortable to sit with at first when you're like figuring out like how to interact with people. Like, people come from different backgrounds. People have like different mannerisms, and I mean there's a blend of are you neurotypical or not? Like you know, all sorts of things of that sort. We just have to get comfortable, I think, with tension and learn how to resolve them. It's like music.
Yeah. Yeah, and without tension, it's also a little bit boring. It's almost like if there's no tension, then people create it anyway. Like I work in schools a lot, and then if there's a classroom and everyone's behaving nice and peacefully, it's almost like, well, someone's going to get bored and do something that's going to cause a disruption, because that's not interesting for everything to be going just peacefully.
Yeah. I'd like to think that eventually we could reach something peaceful, but again...
It's called death.
It's called death! That's just your peace, not everyone else's.
Everyone reaches it, not at the same time.
Yeah. Anyway.
But in a way, like I like the psychedelic idea that everyone's death happens at the same simultaneous moment, in a way, like in a fashion that, like, everyone who dies, the moment of their death is synchronized with everyone else who's ever died and will die, and that all of our deaths just like match up in this other like dimension.
That's really I've
like
never
an event
thought
horizon,
about that.
you know.
That's really interesting. I'm gonna have to chew on that one.
Yeah, it's kind of a DMT thought.
Yeah, I've never done that, so maybe I won't get it, but...
Yeah, just kind of pulling outside of space-time and looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that's been a pretty good conversation.
I think so, too.
We covered a lot. I don't know if there's any final words, like, so maybe one day someone's going to look at you like you look at Joni Mitchell. Do you have any words of advice or something you would like to say to that person?
Well, one, thank you for looking at me like I look at Joni Mitchell. Any word of advice that I could give has already been said multiple times in our conversation, and I think that's just to be honest and learn what honesty means. Not just like the surface level definition of the word, but like what does it truly mean to be an authentic person? And how can you keep from separating your authentic self from your art? Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Gracie.
Thank you.
From Rilke's book of a Monastic Life, translated by Joanna Macy and Anita Barrows. I believe in all that has never yet been spoken. I want to free what waits within me, so that what no one has dared to wish for may for once spring clear without my contriving. If this is arrogant, God, forgive me, but this is what I need to say. May what I do flow from me like a river, no forcing and no holding back, the way it is with children. Then in these swelling and ebbing currents, these deepening tides moving out, returning. I will sing you as no one ever has, streaming through widening channels into the open sea.